It is so snowy outside. We got about 9 to 10 inches out in Maryland, and it's actually it wasn't so much snow as it is like tiny little balls of sleet. It was kind of a weird storm, but it is in fact very icy outside, and it's kind of icy inside. As much as we have tried to keep our thermostat at a reasonable temperature and layer up and put blankets on. But I am in the mood for some weird short fiction. I've been reading a lot of really chunky fantasy books, and I'm very excited to continue the Joe Abercrombie Age of Madness series when that hold comes in on the library. But I need to press pause on some fantasy and read some weird short fiction. So my first book is Karla Cornejo Villavicencio's Catalina. I feel like the cover is giving very brat summer in January, but this is the story of Catalina, who is an undocumented student who is studying in her final year at Harvard, and kind of her experience of being undocumented, her experience of living her life. She is pretty funny, and also I think it's fair to call this weird fiction. I have already read about 50% of this book, and she has just a really funny and kind of acerbic personal expression style that I'm really enjoying. She is writing around 2009, I want to say. So it's kind of a nice blast from the past. She's writing a lot about the Dream Act back when that was a big opportunity for undocumented immigrants. We all know there is a lot going on with that right now, and none of it is good. But this felt very timely to read. I'm really enjoying it. She's a strange person, but she's been really fun to read from. That one is about 200 pages, so almost a novella. And then the other one is It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne de Marcken. Looks like this. I love this cover. I think it's so fun and funky and weird. I'm going in pretty blind, but from what I can tell, this is a post-apocalyptic, kind of surreal stream of consciousness narrative. Our protagonist does not remember much about her personal life, including her name or kind of how all of this happened. She does seem to be talking a lot, and again, I haven't read much. She seems to be talking a lot about a romance or a lover that she had that she remembers but doesn't remember their name. It's just very bizarre and surreal, and to be honest, I feel like that's where I'm at mentally. I'm trapped inside. We're all watching the fire hose of fascism news coming in. So post-apocalyptic, weird, surreal dissociation vibes here, and in Catalina, kind of very individual and personal narrative from a young woman living the undocumented experience, but back in 2009. Kind of a where we got here situation, but both are fiction, both are kind of fun, and I'm hoping they will help pull me out of my funk and more into just some narratives outside of what's going on. But that's where we're at. I will check in when I have read a little bit more of either book.
Oh no, it might be only 20 degrees outside, but we've reached the temperature inside where the cats are melting. Melting! It's like a Dali painting in here. Dude, I told you you were gonna regret that coat.
Hello from day 4 of the winter storm Fern fallout. I have been working from home the last 3 days, as you might be able to tell from my full sweat suit, and I've been doing a terrible job vlogging because we truly have not been doing almost anything. We've just been like sitting on this very rumpled couch or walking around between other locations to sit down. We're all going a little bit stir crazy, but I have done some massive reading of Catalina and wanted to do a quick check-in. I'm sorry that there isn't going to be very much else going on in this vlog, but that's a true reflection of my life right now. Catalina I am almost done with. I'm at the 85% mark. And this is reminding me so strongly of Catcher in the Rye, in that Catalina is very similar to Holden Caulfield. I feel like she's very charismatic but kind of flawed and morally a little messed up in the way that Holden Caulfield is. She is sensationalistic in the way that he is, in particular in regards to sex, which is funny because she's a college senior and he's like a high school boy. But they're both kind of using sex and sexuality as like a gotcha, like attention grabber, and as a way to kind of deflect from their own inner sadness and their own feelings. They're both from very like complicated family dynamics. Catalina's grandparents are the adults that are raising her, and they have very complicated dynamics with one another. She has complicated feelings about them. There is part of this plot line is that her whole family is undocumented from Ecuador, and they all kind of contend with that in different ways, and she has an enormous weight of expectation on her from her grandparents and from herself. And the final similarity that I will say is that, and I hope this isn't a spoiler, but things start to sort of fall apart. This is one of those plots where rather than things kind of successively happening, we almost sort of meet our character in like the moment before everything starts to fall apart. And she has started having these almost like dissociative thoughts, or the narrative has gotten a little bit less reliable as time has gone on, where she is now, there are some episodes of what I'm reading where it seems like she may not be in the real world, or she may not actually be having that conversation, or that may not actually be what's going on. It was always kind of quirky, weird in that way, but things are kind of like falling apart towards the end of the book in a really interesting and compelling way, not in a poorly written way. I'm really enjoying the conversation that this is having about immigration. I think it's interesting in relationship to what's going on right now, but I do want to say, and Catalina would say this, that being an undocumented immigrant is certainly not something that it's something that factors into her everyday life. It's something that affects her opinions and her thoughts and the decisions that she has even on the table to make, and the decisions that she does make. And it is, I think she would say, far from one of the most interesting things about her. She is a very distinct voice and personality. I go very far back and forth on whether I like that voice and personality. Like I said, kind of, she makes herself sensational and bombastic just to kind of deflect, and so it's hard to tell. Some of the things that she's saying I don't like, but I think that's almost the point, is that she would rather you didn't like her on the basis of this than that you felt bad for her on the basis of how she's actually feeling and doing. So it's been really interesting to kind of spend some time with her. It has taken me forever to read these 200 pages, especially given that I have been sitting at home the last 4 days. But it's been a lot of doom scrolling. I'm hoping that I can buckle down and finish this tonight.
I went to tell Kaden the story, but it looks like he was shot in the back. Sometimes the night shift catches up with you at 2 p.m., I guess.
Okay, so it took a little longer than I had thought or hoped for me to get to kind of settle in for the evening, but I am now, all is right with the world. I've got all of my winter essentials. I've got my tea, I've got my tissues. I don't know if anybody else's nose kind of starts its marathon in November and just keeps running until like May, honestly. But I've been surrounded by tissues lately, which is kind of gross. And I am going to be catching up on Bridgerton. I'm going to watch a little bit of the past seasons to prepare for the release, which is tomorrow, of the next season. It is a great week for good TV to come out, so I hope that I like it. And I'm going to be doing some final touches on our save the dates, and I'm hoping to just kind of unwind before I settle in to read and get some of that done. I ended up getting kind of self-conscious that the envelopes I ordered are not the same shade of white as the paper I printed on. This is the kind of BS that you start worrying about with a wedding. So I'm going to just add like a nice little green leaf design to try to make the envelopes look a little nicer and fancier. Oh, pretty nice. Oops, it is midnight and I just got into bed. I finished season 2 of Bridgerton in time for tomorrow's release. I gotta binge season 3 quickly or something. But I am gonna still read a couple pages of Catalina before I go to sleep, because it feels like time really isn't real right now. So might as well get some reading done. Good afternoon. I am working from home, so I've got a little bit of work done this morning, but I did want to pop in and do a quick review because I finished Catalina and I have some thoughts on it. I think ultimately I am going to give this book 3.5 to 4 stars. It is very well written. And I had some wonderful takeaways. I went through and highlighted a ton of different passages in this book. I think the author, Karla Cornejo Villavicencio, is a very talented writer, and she had a lot of really acute, astute observations about being undocumented, about being a woman, about class disparities. Like, all of it was really, really interesting. I've since learned that she herself was one of Harvard's first undocumented students to graduate from the program. And so I think there's a little bit of autobiographical observation in this text, although obviously I don't think she is Catalina. I also thought that the relationship between Catalina and her grandparents was really fascinating and really well articulated and explored. There were a couple of things that I just didn't love about this book. There's one passage that I highlighted where Catalina says, "The way that men write about women is the way that I learned to speak English," which is a really interesting observation, but it was also true. I felt like so much of her perception of herself and the way that she wrote and spoke about herself and other women was from the male gaze. And while that is certainly like an interesting characterization, and it is a time of life for many young women, and it was very self-aware on the part of the author, it was also kind of tough to read. It was not my favorite. It could be kind of icky or repetitive. She could be kind of narcissistic and toxic, which is fun. I mean, it's the right length of book to read about this character, I think. I enjoyed it, but it is not going to be maybe my number one favorite character in the world. And since we spent so much time in her head with her observations, that did kind of bring down my overall rating of the book. But what I will say is that this is the author's first fiction novel, but she did write a book called The Undocumented Americans. It's a nonfiction book about her own experience traveling the country and getting to know undocumented communities and people who are experiencing that status in the US. I'm really interested to read that book since I thought her own thoughts and takeaways that she wanted the reader to have about this experience was a real strength of this book. And so I think that's going to add to my TBR. I did also read the first 25 pages of It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over, and I am enjoying that one. It's really bizarre. Our character is a zombie who eats people. It's really interesting, and it's also really short. So I'm going to try and get a lot of that done today. The only other update is that I have been working diligently on my Salty Day sweater. I now have one complete sleeve, and I have a sleeve, hold on, it's in a delicate stage. I have a sleeve that's coming along. I just had to frog like this whole pattern cuff situation on the other one. I was all the way up to here and I had to frog back to this first detail because I missed something. I did find another skein of the actual merino wool, which is fabulous. It costs about $40 a ball, which I had forgotten about. I bought this in like a fit of delusion 2 years ago. I don't know why I thought I could spend this much money on yarn, but when I went to buy another ball, I damn near had a heart attack. So I'm glad I found another one, but now I am playing yarn chicken with my mohair, which is a little bit lighter, even though they're the same colorway. It's just a little bit lighter than my merino, and so I'm a little worried if I run out of the mohair, it'll be obvious because you can kind of see there's a little bit of variegation in the color between the mohair and the regular yarn. So those are my boring knitting concerns, but I will update you when I either find out that I've run out of mohair or not. Caden is back at work tonight, and I just got back from grocery shopping. It's the first time I've like tried to drive my car in 5 days, and the roads are still pretty icy and dicey. So it was a little bit stressful, and I also went to Trader Joe's, which I've mentioned before is always worth the trip, but also like a hellscape. And there's so much ice on the road that it was like worse than usual. So that's all behind me. It's all in the past. I've got my sweats on. I've got my soup dumplings that I fought a war to get. I've got an Olipop and a little adult beverage waiting in the wings. And I am starting season 4 of Bridgerton. I'm very excited. Okay, a quick update. First of all, I am re-knitting that poor sleeve and trying to get it right this time. But second of all, Oh, I'm like almost on the first episode of this new season of Bridgerton, and I am swooning. I have to say, the first three seasons have been wonderful, and they're all, I think, really interesting different tropes. But I have to say, I don't think any of the other couples has expressed such lovely, like, tenderness and sweetness. I don't think I've ever believed in another one of the couples the way that I suddenly just like need the two of them to be together. If you have not checked it out and you are a Bridgerton fan, I strongly recommend. I'm kicking my feet over here. It is Saturday and we are headed out to an art museum really quickly, so I wanted to wrap up with my review. Felix and I are going to review It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne de Marcken. I didn't really check in for this one because it's about 120 something pages, so it was really kind of a one sitting sort of book, which is not really a standard book for me, and I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it. But I ended up actually really loving this book. I think I'm going to give it 4 stars overall because it was a really well done extended metaphor, and the content of it just is not true to my personal experience. So I thought it was really well written and interesting, but I think it would have resonated with me more if I had experienced the subject matter, which is kind of the loss of, in this case, a partner, or the loss of someone that you love. So it's an apocalypse in that she is a zombie, she is in the apocalypse, but she is really fixated on and processing the loss of her wife, girlfriend, spouse. She can't remember this woman's name anymore. She can't remember her own name. She's literally dropping body parts from the first sentence of the book, which kind of captured my attention right away. But I thought it was just a lovely way of exploring this idea. It kind of indulges the fantasy that, you know, once you have experienced this loss, the world is never the same. She's kind of getting to live in that reality, but she's also experiencing like the very real fallout of missing the person that she loves, forgetting things about them, desperately trying to remember them and hold on to that past. And also, there's some cannibalism in this, which is interesting, but it's kind of this metaphor for how like her life goes on and she continues to survive, and she's like horrified by that in the face of the loss of her person. So it was phenomenal. I thought it was a really interesting book. It was the right length, but I thought it was really lovely. It was not the apocalypse novel I thought I was getting into, but it was a fantastic apocalypse novel nonetheless. All right, thanks so much for watching.